Here's the deal, Dave.
It's Greg.
Yeah, I know. I know it's Greg, Dave. But here's the thing. Ever since I put you in charge of social media, it just really hasn't been working out.
It's not my sweet spot, all right? I'm an accountant.
First of all, you don't have to sign your name after everything. What are you, my dad?
Well, again,
And then I have 6 tweets after that that just say google.com. Now, I can't even figure out, like, what was going through your brain when... Were you trying to Google from within Twitter? Please don't answer that. Long story short, my little brother is about to graduate from high school. He's got like 10,000 followers. I don't know how he does it. No one does. But we're gonna put him in charge of this, okay? So go ahead and send me an electronic mail with the usernames and passwords. Think you can handle that, Dave? Or do you need to write it down on your little pen and paper here?
I can handle that.
Okay, great. And then after that, we're gonna talk about your future here at this company. Thank you.
You want an email? I'll give you an email. Oh, that's good. I like that. Dear Hipster Doofus, here are your painfully obvious passwords. You bearded, no good, sneaker wearing. Oh, that's good. I haven't heard language like that since the Navy. Just because Daddy owns the company. Ooh, that's dark. But I like it.
Hey, Greg.
Yeah, Mike.
You know you've been tweeting?
I've been twittering!
Poor Greg, huh? I'm telling you, every time I watch those videos, it just reminds me of just like real life, because I am so guilty of that. I think, all of us at one point in time in our life, we've said something or we've tweeted something or whatever it is, and we just said, what in the world was I thinking, right? And what's so interesting about words is that once words leave your mouth, they're gone. It's permanent. Once you put that on social media, I mean, it's gone. It's permanent. And that's not great news. But the good news is this, is that God has given every single one of us one of these things right here, a pause button, right? We've all got one of those pause buttons in our life. And what the thing that, though, we wish for, and we would go, man, God, this would be great if you could give us this instead of a pause button, is this thing right here, which is a rewind button. You know, we would love that in our lives. We'd love to go back to those moments and just go, man, if I could redo that, if I could say that over, if I could do that over, that would be awesome. In fact, as I think about my life, I think about when I was 13 years old, as just a little kid, I thought when I was 13 that I just kind of had the world figured out. I thought that, hey, I know how things go, and Mom and Dad, if you could just kind of step aside, let me just do life because I know how to do this thing, that would be awesome. And at 13, I remember one evening I was talking to my mom, and we were in the living room together, and she was about 10 feet away, and we were just going back and forth, and she was saying some things I didn't like, and eventually I got to the point to where she made me angry. And so I looked at her, and I said, Mom, you're being such a fill in the blank. And I said it. And I remember in that moment, my mom, and I don't know how she did this, she was 10 feet away. She had these go-go gadget arms that reached across the room and went smack, smack, smack. And when she did that, 2 things hit me. Number one, I was like, she just slapped me. That's crazy. And the second thing, I thought, man, she is a superhero, because how in the world did she do that? That was unbelievable, right? But today when I think about that, just in my personal life, I just go, man, I so wish I had one of these, because I would go back to that moment and I would change that moment. And I think we all have that in our life. I think that we can all think of a story or two that we have said something or done something that we so wish we had a rewind button. And the reason why, and the reason really why we're doing this whole series and talking about this is because of what we said last week. And last week, one of the things we started with, we just said, hey, words are powerful. When it comes to words in your life and in my life, they're just powerful. I mean, they have shaped your life. They have shaped your identity. They've shaped your self-worth. They've shaped childhoods. They shape a marriage. They shape some of the most important relationships in our life. And something interesting to think about, they also shape our confidence. Because you can take somebody with little to no confidence, and then all of a sudden they have all this confidence, and you're like, where'd that come from? And they're like, well, I was meeting with this mentor, I was meeting with this individual, and they just said these words, and I have confidence. And the reverse is true as well. You can take somebody with a lot of confidence, and all of a sudden they lost it. And you said, what happened? They would say, well, somebody said something. You know, these words, because words are powerful. And not only that, we talked about that last week, but we also talked about this. We said words aren't equally weighted. Words aren't equally weighted. In other words, if we were to ask this question, how many, positive words do we need to say to make up for every negative word said? So when somebody says something hurtful, how many positive words do you need? And if you think about that, like logically, just think about that logically, you would think it'd be a 1-to-1 ratio. You would think, hey, for every negative word, just say a positive word and it's fine. They should cancel one another out. But that's not the case. In fact, last week we looked at some research from Dr. Gottman, and Dr. Gottman looked at thousands and thousands of couples over the course of many, many years, and he researched these individuals and these marriage relationships, and he was on a quest, and his quest was to discover what's the difference between happy couples and unhappy couples. And in his research, what he found is what he calls the magic relationship ratio. And the magic relationship ratio says this: for every negative word spoken, hey, you're a loser, you're never going to make it. For every negative word spoken, he said, if we can say 5 positive words that, hey, you're wonderful, you're beautiful, you're handsome, you're funny, you're so smart, that these words, every 5, should level out the negative. So 5-to-1 ratio. And then he went on in his research, and it's fascinating. He said, hey, if you can maintain this in your relationship, in a marriage relationship, and I think it's true pretty much in any relationship, he said that's one of the indicators, that's one of the big signs to a healthy and happy relationship. But he said, on the other hand, he said, if it's close to 1-to-1, in other words, it's, hey, for every positive, here's a negative, for every positive, here's a negative. He said with 90% accuracy, so these are things you got to pay attention to, 90% accuracy, you can predict that when it's 1-to-1 or less, that marriage will end in divorce. And so last week I said, guys, we got to think about this. I mean, think about it in your marriage, in your personal relationships, in your friendships, with your boyfriend or girlfriend, with your son or daughter. I mean, what's your ratio? Is it closer to 1-to-1? Or is it closer to 5-to-1? The point being is that words are important. Words are powerful. And words are not equally weighted. And something else that we didn't talk about last week is this, is that the source isn't equally weighted as well. And you guys know this. I mean, you've experienced this. If you're an organizational leader, your boss, or you're the head coach, you know that your words weigh the very most. You know that as an organizational leader, you can walk right into a meeting and your staff can be talking about stuff and, innovating and creating, trying to problem solve, whatever it is. And you can say one word and it can completely shut that meeting down. It can just suck the innovation and creativity out of that room. You can say one word and completely begin to dissolve the culture of your organization because your words weigh the most. And do you know where else this is present? This is also true when it comes to our fathers, isn't it? And I can't quite explain this. I really can't. But the weight of the weight of a father's words are so unique. I mean, you think about it this way: is coming back to our scales. You think about if you have all these friends, and these friends say, hey, you're amazing, just great things to say about you, or on social media they can say some things, or maybe your extended family, your aunt and uncle, they say these things, or maybe one of your best friends, or even your wife or husband. I mean, they can say things, and you're like, man, that's powerful. But then your mom, she can say something, and it is powerful. I mean, mom's words have such weight and significance, more than any of this. But isn't it true when your father says the same thing? His words, they just weigh the very most. I think about that in my life, and I think about January of 2015 was our first Sunday here in this brand new facility. Before this, we were meeting in Parkside Elementary. And I remember during that time, I was in the foyer. It was Sunday morning. It was before service, and I was so excited. And I was looking around at this whole facility and just all the work that you guys did. I mean, you created an amazing, amazing place. All the insulation, the paint, the decorations, and all the aesthetics in Wamba and Upstreet and the auditorium. Just amazing. And I was so proud, so proud. I'm looking around, and then all of a sudden I see my beautiful wife, Jill, with her parents. And her parents' names are Dan and Julie. And so Dan and Julie come walking in, and I greet them, and I give them a hug, and I'm like, how are you doing? We talk and all this stuff. And then I begin to show them our facility because they hadn't seen it. And we look at Wombaland, we look at Up Street, and we come in here, and we just show them the whole thing. And Jill's dad, who has a much more traditional kind of church background, looks at what you guys created and looks what he experienced, and he went, wow. He said, Buck, this is impressive. This is impressive. And then he looked at me and he said, I'm so proud of you. And it was so odd because in that moment, I really had to turn away from Dan and Julie because I got emotional. I was like, wow, that hit me. And as I had my kind of back turned, this little voice in my head said, wow, I so wish my dad would say that. I so wish those were the words of my father. Why? Because words and the source of the words aren't equally weighted, and the weight of your Father's words weigh the very most. And not only is that true, but something we don't really think about too often when it comes to words and the power of words is this, is that the recovery time isn't equally weighted as well. That when it comes to our words, like, when I said, hey, Mom, you're, that word, and then I told her I'm sorry, it's not like my mom recovered like in 10 seconds and went, oh, it's fine, sweetie. I mean, that took time for her to recover, even though I said I'm sorry. And when you say words and I say words and it's hurtful, it hurts them emotionally. And then we say, hey, I'm sorry. Hey, I know I shouldn't have said that. I'm sorry. But here's some good reasons why I said that, but I'm sorry. We have an expectation like they're going to recover like that. Like, hey, in 30 seconds, you should be fine. Come on, can't we just be normal? But you've lived enough life to know it doesn't work that way, that the recovery time isn't equal. Because the recovery or the emotional pain that we experience is so much like the physical pain we experience in life. Meaning, think about this. Imagine if somebody threw a bowling ball at you. That'd be kind of weird. I mean, let's go with this one, though. But if they threw a bowling ball and it hit your leg, and all of a sudden, it hits your leg pretty hard, and there's some damage, and you're on the ground, and you're like, man, and then they looked at you, and they went, hey, I'm sorry. It's not like, and then they said, hey, get up, walk, be fine. What? That's ludicrous, especially the greater the damage. If your leg is broken as a result of that, and they're like, hey, get up, be fine, walk. You're like, are you kidding me? That was incredible amounts of damage. It's going to take days, it could take weeks, it could take months, depending on the severity of what happened. Well, guys, maybe this is why you came. Maybe this is what you need to hear today. Did you know, in the same way that there's physical wounds and brokenness, that the exact same thing happens in here? That there's emotional wounds and brokenness? The problem is we just can't see it. So we just kind of sweep it under the rug. We say, hey, I said I'm sorry. Can we just move on? The problem is the recovery time is not equal as well. So if words are that powerful, if the source of the words aren't equal, if the recovery time takes the amount of time it does, if all of that's true, then the question is, what do we do? Because you have to live. You have relationships, right? You have people that you're going to engage with. We have life to live. Well, last week we said there is something we can do. In fact, last week we learned from James, the brother of Jesus. And James spoke into this whole thing, and he gave us some incredible, incredible insight. And one of the things James said, when it comes to your words, when it comes to your most important relationships, is he said this. He said, be quick to listen, slow to speak. In other words, be quick to listen, ask questions, be curious, and be slow to speak. Wait and be late with your words. So just like last week, we said this all together. I'd love us to do this again, all together out loud. So here we go. Ready? Let's say this together. Quick to listen, slow to speak. One more time with a little bit more passion. Here we go. Quick to listen, slow to speak. There you go. That's awesome. Guys, I'm just telling you, that is more important than you know. And last week we ended our time and we just said, hey, practically speaking, Christian or not, if you're willing to do what James has challenged us to do in your most important relationships, and you're curious and you ask those questions and tell me more, and then you are late and you wait with your words, it'll make your relationships better. It's helpful. Now, that's not all James had to say about our words. In fact, today we're just going to continue the conversation because James not only said, be quick to listen, slow to speak, and as a result of that, you'll slow to become angry. He also said a lot more in terms of the power of your words, in terms of the influence of your words. And today, I simply just want to continue this conversation and learn from James, the brother of Jesus. In fact, we're going to jump right in, and here's what he does. He continues this conversation, and he says something that just creates common ground. And here's how James continues this conversation. He says this, we all stumble in many ways. And I love that he said this because this is true for all of us. Again, it really doesn't matter if you believe in God or don't believe in God. We all can come to the place to acknowledge, yes, I've messed up at least one time in my life. And James says, hey, we've all stumbled in many ways, right? And then he said, what he says next is an indicator to say, and the place that we stumble the very most is with our words. Look at the way James says it. He says this, he goes, those who are never at fault in what they say are perfect, able to keep their whole body in check. Now, this is really important that we understand the word perfect in the original language, which was the Greek. James originally wrote this in Greek. In the Greek, when you look at that word perfect, it's not the definition you're thinking of right now. In the Greek, the word perfect literally means to be complete. It means to be mature. It's the idea that, hey, I've failed so much in my life. I've learned from those failures. I put some different things into practice, and I've been complete. Like, I'm much more mature. I'm more consistent. I have a better disposition in life. I am mature in life. That's literally what it means. And so with that in mind, here's what James is getting at. James is saying, mature your mouth, mature your life. Mature your mouth. Like if your mouth is mature, your whole life is impacted. It impacts the direction and quality of your life. Or think about it this. James is getting at this point. He's saying, gain control of your mouth. Quick to listen, slow to speak. Quick to listen, slow to speak. Gain control of your life. That this little bitty kind of physiological part of our body is so powerful that it directs the quality and the direction of our whole life. And then James begins to illustrate that. And James says, let me show you. Let me kind of give you a couple examples. He says, think of it this way. He says, when we put bits into the mouths of horses to make them obey us, we can turn the whole animal. Now, if you've ridden a horse or you've seen a horse or you've watched a horse, be ridden on Discovery Channel, I mean, either way, think about it. I mean, we've all seen this. We're all aware, like this little bitty bit control this massive animal. James says, think of that. That's an example of it. And then James says, if that doesn't work, try this one on. He gives us another example. He says, or take ships as an example. Although they are so large and driven by strong winds, they are steered by a very small rudder wherever the pilot wants to go. And as I read that, I thought, well, let's just contextualize it to today. James has his first century ships, but if you were to think of massive boats, massive ships today, one of the places or one of the things I would think about are these things right here, are big cruise ships. I mean, think about these cruise ships. Now, I don't know about you if you've ever been on a cruise, but I've personally never been on a cruise. Jill and I have never been on a cruise. We'd like to go on a cruise. We just never have. So this week I was thinking about cruise ships, and I started doing research on cruise ships and just some interesting things, and I bumped into a bunch of things. I was like, really? I had no idea. For example, a large cruise ship is about 16 stories tall. Like, think of a 16-story building. That's the size of a large cruise ship. In addition to that, these massive, massive boats, their average speed is about 23 knots. That's about 20 miles an hour. And for me, when I think about that, think about going from Galveston to Cancun, I'm thinking, really? That's all? That's as fat? That seems pretty slow to me. And then on most cruise ships, here's something that's interesting. Most cruise ships don't have a 13th floor because of all the superstition around the world with the number 13. And if you've ever been on one, you've probably realized that. Another thing I ran across, and this is for those of you who are considering retirement, or maybe you're in retirement or you've thought about retirement, there's a great debate right now, and you can search this out on Google, that is between this to say, should I retire in an assisted living home or should I retire on a cruise ship? Because which one is more expensive, right? And actually, it leans to say it's cheaper and more cost productive to retire on a cruise ship. So there you go. Maybe there's your retirement plans right there, right? The last one I thought, and we could go on and on, but this has nothing to do with what we're talking about, but it's kind of interesting, is that in most cruise ships, listen to this is kind of morbid. Did you know that there's a morgue in most cruise ships? Isn't that terrible? I read that and I was like, man, that is such depressing news. So anyways, back to James. So think about this. James is going, okay, get this in your mind. Little bitty thing controls the whole body, right? The whole direction of your life. He's like these ships, this big, big ship is controlled by these little bitty rudders right here, right? And James then connects the dots and he goes, okay. He says, listen. He says, likewise. He continues. The tongue is a small part of the body, but it makes great boast. His point being, guys, this part of your body controls so much of your relationship, so much of the direction of your life. And then if that's not enough, like James is like, hey, I'm going to be so repetitive here. I'm going to keep going. I'm going to keep the gas pedal down in terms of my illustrations and examples. And he gives us another one. And he continues, he says this. He says, consider what a great forest is set on fire by a small spark. So get that in your minds. This is massive forest fire. Think about forest fires in 2018, massive forest fires around the United States of America, specifically in California. In fact, in California, the largest forest fire on record called Camp Fire, destroyed over 150,000 acres. 88 people lost their lives. 18,000 structures were completely obliterated. 14,000 of the 18,000 structures were homes. It's a massive, massive forest fire. So you think about that whole thing. Get that in your mind. And then think about that massive raging fire was started by a little bitty spark. James says, now you got that in your mind? And then he connects it. And he says, the tongue also is a fire, a world of evil among the parts of the body. It corrupts the whole person, sets the whole course of one's life on fire, and is itself set on fire, look at this, by hell, And James is driving the point to go, man, don't you know how powerful you are? You're incredibly powerful because words are powerful. And we've seen this. We've seen entire relationships destroyed because of words. We've seen entire marriages destroyed because of words. We've seen wars fought, and millions of people have died because of words. And we've seen suicide because of words that have been spoken on social media about an individual. We've seen the evil. We've seen how our words can set things ablaze. And if we're really honest, if we're just talking, I think all of us could, starting with me, could raise our hand and say, yeah, I've said something that has set this relationship on fire. I've said something that feels very evil just to hurt that individual. James says, yeah, pay attention. This thing is so powerful. And then if that's not enough, it's like, James, we get the point. Like, just move on. James says, no, I don't think you get the point. I want to continue making the point of how powerful your words are. So he continues. And he says this. He says, all kinds of animals, birds, reptiles, and sea creatures are being tamed and have been tamed by human beings. But no one, look at this phrase, no one can tame the tongue. It is a restless evil full of deadly poison. And I thought this week, James says, if everything you're saying is true, then one of the greatest things we could do is that when we are born, I think, kids, little girls, little boys should come with instruction manuals. And in that instruction manual, when it gets to the mouth, I think the very first page in that instruction manual should be these things, warning labels. To say, hey, be careful, danger, toxic radiation. This stuff can make you sick. It can bring rottenness to relationships. We are all born with our pilot lights lit and with all kinds of potential for incredible good with these words and extraordinary evil. And then James continues and says this. He says, with the tongue we praise our Lord and Father, and with it we curse human beings who have been made in God's likeness. Now, this is one of the number one reasons why people don't like Christians. This is one of the number one reasons why people speak negatively against the church, because this level of hypocrisy. This idea that, hey, we can come together like this and, Taylor and Chris can lead us in these amazing songs and incredible truths about our Heavenly Father. And we can praise God with our lips. But then we can walk out And we can get in our cars and we can begin to curse our kids. We can begin to gossip around people. We can say things that are incredibly hurtful to our husband, our wife, our girlfriend, our boyfriend. And then we can go to a restaurant and maybe the waitress doesn't serve the food the way we like it. And so we can talk and curse her too. And then on the way home, somebody cuts us off, and as they cut us off, I'm going to curse you too with my words. And then on Monday morning, we can go to work and we can gossip. We can talk about that person and this person. Or we can go to school and we can tear somebody down with our words. Such duplicity, such hypocrisy. And I love what James says at the end of this. He says, in God's likeness. Guys, don't you know that every single human being has worth and value and significance because they are made in the image of God? Don't you know they're God's kids? And I mean, if you really want to upset a parent, if you want to tick a parent off, if you want to hurt a parent, if you want to make a parent angry, then just hurt their kids. Just say something hurtful to their kids. Well, the same thing is true when it comes to your heavenly Father. And so, of course, James says what he does. He continues, and he says, out of the same mouth come praise and cursing. Again, this hypocrisy. My brothers and sisters, and imagine you're sitting around the table with James, and he bangs the table at this point, and he says, this should not be. I mean, people are made in the image of God. Your wife is made in the image of God. Your husband, your son, your daughter, your mom, your dad. To which at this point we're like, okay, James, like white flags up. Surrender, like I get the point. And James says, I'm not quite done. And he continues. And he says, can both fresh water and salt water flow from the same spring? My brothers and sisters, can a fig tree bear olives? Well, no, James, fig trees can't bear olives. Can or grapevine bear figs? No, that's not possible, James. Neither can a salt spring produce fresh water. Such duplicity. And at this point, we're like, okay, James, as we said before, we get it. Give us some good news. Give us some hope. Give us a direction. But the most interesting thing that James does here is he stops the passage right here. And he ends it. And he moves on to a completely different subject. In other words, James has what I call a Forrest Gump moment. You guys remember Forrest Gump? Remember that movie? Did you know that movie came out in 1994? Isn't that crazy? That's 25 years ago. I read that this week. I was like, are you kidding me? I feel super old right now. Anyways, but the whole movie, Forrest Gump, fascinating movie. It's about this, little boy, starts out with a little boy named Forrest Gump, and he grows up. Extraordinary life, the whole movie. And throughout the movie, Forrest Gump will say these things, super random things sometimes, tell these stories. And at the end of every one of these stories, he says this statement. He says this, and that's all I have to say about that. And this week, I thought, James, you had your Forrest Gump moment. You just ended it right there. And that's all I have to say about that. No application. No, here's the 3 things to do from there. No hope for the future. So James, what are you trying to do? What's your point? And I think what James is trying to teach you and to me is this, is that there's no once and for all solution, guys. At the end of the day, when it comes to your mouth, there is no, hey, do these 3 things and it's going to be fixed. Do these 2 things and you're going to, never say anything hurtful. There is no once and for all solution because your mouth and my mouth has a potential for extraordinary good, and our mouths have the potential for extraordinary evil. And James emphasizes and makes the point, no one can tame the tongue. So, imagine this. Imagine in your personal life. Imagine that, in this upcoming week. Imagine if you read all that. Imagine in your personal time, you just open the Bible and you read James 3. And in James 3, you're reading this, we all stumble. You're like, yeah, that's true. And, it's like a ship and, fire and all that. You read all these, no one can tame the tongue, all these things. And you're like, wow, deadly poison, lit on fire by hell, all this stuff. And at the end of it, he just kind of does this curveball, just kind of ends it. I mean, you would have attention. You'd go, what do I do with that? And then imagine if you and I met for coffee and we were just talking and you said, Buck, I read James 3, and it just ends abruptly. So what should I do? Like, what would be wise to do with what James says. And if we were just talking, having this conversation, in my opinion, I would just say it's important to remember 2 words. The first word is this, is remember. Just remember. And you would say, well, remember what? And I'd say, remember this. You are powerful because your words are powerful. I mean, one of the things I think we forget, and we should wake up every single day of our lives and go, wow, I've got extraordinary kind of power. Because my words can be so good or so evil. One of the wisest things we could do is wake up every single day of our life and just look at these warning signs. Think about them. They go, hey, this is so capable, of explosiveness, toxic, radiation, biohazard, corrosive. Like, okay, waking up this morning, thinking about this. I have potential for all kinds of good and all kinds of evil. So remember, you're powerful because words are powerful. So, in the words of James, be quick to listen, slow to speak, be late and wait when it comes to your words. I would say that'd be the first thing. Because if we can do that, just honestly, just think about this practically. If we can just remember that every single day when we wake up, it has the potential to prevent a whole lot of regret with the people that we love the most. The second word I would say would be this, is apologize. And what I mean by this is when your words hurt, apologize. Because James says, hey guys, all of us are going to stumble. That was his first line in this whole passage, which means we're going to mess up. And when your words hurt, immediately apologize. Because there is such power in an apology. In fact, one of the leading thinkers when it comes to, apologies and how to do it right, how to do it wrong, this whole thing. One of the greatest researchers is Dr. Harry Lerner. And Dr. Lerner, she says this, one of her phrases, it's not up on the screen, but one of her phrases, she says the 3 most important words in your life and in mine are I am sorry. So much healing can come as a result of that. And she talks about the power of an apology, and she says, this a lot of different ways, but one of the ways she says it that I really like is this, in terms of, here's the power of an apology. She says, being able to make a sincere apology, one that says, yes, I get it, I screwed up, your feelings make sense, and I'm taking this seriously, is at the heart of being successful in leadership, parenting, and friendship, as well as our own integrity and self-worth. You want to get better or think about how do I improve as a parent, as a leader, in my marriage relationships and my integrity and my self-worth? It's to figure out the power of an apology. It has a direct impact. And then she says this, she wraps it up, and she says, and the failure to apologize, even a good relationship will suffer quietly. Because we really feel it when someone won't take responsibility for what they said or didn't say. There's extraordinary power in an apology. And then she goes on to talk about, that there's a good way to apologize and not a good way to apologize. And she said, one of the things you need to keep in mind that when you apologize, one of the words you should never, ever, ever use in an apology is this word, is but. Never say but, right? It's like, I am sorry, but. I am sorry, but. Now listen, if you haven't been paying attention or if you've tuned out or, if your mind is wandering, again, just lean in. This is so important. Here's the deal. Even if you are right, even if you could substantiate it logically and intellectually as to why you're saying but, like you are 100% right on your motivations. You're 100% right on your context. You're 100% right. If they just understood everything over here after the but, it would substantiate as to why they slipped up. Even if you're 100% right about everything after the but, as soon as you say the word but, it's a false apology. You have robbed the power of that apology. So, next time we mess up with our mouths, one of the greatest things we could do is avoid the word but. The second thing she says to be cautious of in terms of an apology is a little bit more of something we got to get our minds around. She says this, she says, anytime you apologize simply for emotion, you say something like, I'm sorry you feel that way, or I'm sorry that what I said made you upset. I see you're upset. I'm sorry you're mad. I'm sorry you're angry. I'm sorry you're hurt. And we just leave it there. She says that's one of the worst things you can do. And this requires us to think a little bit because when you simply apologize for emotion, it negates you the responsibility as to why they have the emotion. I mean, if you just said something that's really hurtful, if you did something that's really hurtful, and all you say, hey, I apologize for the hurt, you didn't own what you did. You escaped the responsibility. To them, you just said, hey, I'm sorry you hurt, but I'm not going to own anything that I have done. And again, you cancel the apology. The apology is false. So then the question is, what's a good apology? What's a meaningful apology? Well, meaningful apology communicates 3 R's and a T. A meaningful apology communicates regret, responsibility, remedy, and time. To explain what I mean, think about it this way. In terms of regret, it's to say these words. It's to say, I know you're hurting. Like in this relationship, I see something, and I see you're hurting. I see you're sad. I know that's a reality. Secondly is responsibility. And responsibility is incredibly hard because this takes vulnerability for you. This takes humility. This is extraordinarily difficult. But responsibility is to say, hey, I know when I said blank and blank, I hurt you. In other words, I'm not going to play the blame game. I'm not going to sit here and go, well, you know, if you wouldn't, well, you did, because blame's lame. It's ineffective. Blame never works. Don't play the blame game. In essence, take the piece of the pie, and even if the piece of the pie, 90% of the piece of pie was her fault or his fault, well, 10% is yours. So own the 10% and say, you know what? No blame, no thinking about what they did. I'm just going to be right here and focus on my 10%. And I know you're hurting because I said blank and blank. Accept that responsibility. Incredibly powerful. And then the remedy. That's where you say, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. And then what are you going to do differently? I will work on being quick to listen and slow to speak in the future. I really messed up on that one. And remedy is this idea to think, hey, I really want you to know, I see it, I know how I created that, and man, I want you to know sincerely, I am sorry. And here's what I'm going to do differently in the future to not hurt you. And then time. As we alluded to at the beginning, it's going to take time. And this is where you can ask for forgiveness. It's a completely appropriate thing to say, please consider forgiving me. Take all the time you need. Because just as a physical wound, I mean, if it's a wound or if it's a break, it's going to take time. The same thing is true with an emotional wound or break, depending on the severity of what you said. Guys, this is so tough. This requires extraordinary amounts of vulnerability, tons of humility. But I'm telling you, it works. It works. You know, I think about Jill and I, my beautiful wife, and I can't tell you how many times, you know, Jill and I have gotten crossways, and she said something that hurt, and then I say something that hurt, and we just get on that crazy cycle. We get stuck. And when we get stuck, I think about this. I think about the 3 R's and a T, the 3 R's and a T. But I don't want to do anything, you know, because I'm hurt. And then I think about this book that I read about relationships, and in the book, it was talking about this cycle. And then at the end of the book, it said, hey, who goes first? Like, who's going to be the one to apologize first? Who's going to be the one to take initiative first? And then it says, well, the one who is most mature goes first. And I've read that, and I thought, and that's just stuck with me, but I think time and time again, I don't want to be mature, you know? I just want to sit here, and she needs to apologize. I mean, I'm hurt, you know? But I'm telling you, that just stuck with me, and I'm like, okay. If the most mature one's going to go first, and who really cares at the end of the day? That's just motivation for me. Okay, babe, here's the deal. Regret. I see you're hurt. Responsibility. I've taken the time to ask some questions, to think about this and go, what can I own? What's my piece of the pie? And then I own that. And then remedy. Oh, man, I'm so sorry, babe. Here's what I'm going to do differently. And then time. I just ask you consider forgiving me. Take all the time you need. When I do that versus play the blame game, when I do that versus, you need to apologize to me because your piece of the pie is bigger, I'm just telling you that leads to healing, that leads to reconciliation, that leads to better relationships. Not only with Jill, with my sons, and with the people around me. And guys, one last thing. You may be sitting here and you may think about your relationships, maybe some really important relationships, maybe with your mom, with your dad. Maybe you've done what I've done and said those words to your mom. You may think about something on social media and you may think, well, that was a long time ago. here's what I want you to know. Guys, it's not too late. It's not too late. I love what Brene Brown, incredible researcher, she says these words as it relates to parenting, but this is also true when it comes to all relationships. She says, the most powerful meaning-making moments in our relationships with our children, and I don't care if they're 2 or 42, in other words, it's not too late, happen in these incredibly imperfect moments. It's not when you preach a big sermon. It's not when you're incredibly philosophical and logical and it all lines up that makes the greatest impact. The greatest impact is those vulnerable moments, those humble moments that we're able to remember that I am powerful because words are powerful, quick to listen, slow to speak. And in those vulnerable moments where we apologize, when we hurt, apologize. When our words hurt, apologize. And if we're willing to work through the 3 R's and the T, regret, here's what I see. Responsibility, I know I created that. Remedy, I'm sorry. Here's what I'm going to do differently. Time, please consider forgiving. Take all the time you need. It's the thing that leads to making our relationships better. Let me go ahead and pray for us. God, thank you again for today. Thank you over and over and over for the fact that you have preserved letters just like James. So we could learn these very repetitive ideas that words are powerful, words can hurt, words have incredible potential. And Father, with the things we talked about today, for all of us, wherever we're at, I just ask that you illuminate, that you bring to our minds maybe areas that we need to apologize for, gaps that we need to own. And Father, with that, I just pray that you give us the courage to follow through, to do the 3 R's and the T, and then to trust you with the results. In Jesus' name, amen. Guys, thanks so much for being here. I'll see you next week for part 3.